The autumn afternoon cast long shadows across downtown Charleston as Robert Manning walked hand in hand with his 5-year-old daughter. Emma, the crisp October air carried the scent of fallen leaves and the distant aroma of fresh bread from the bakery they'd just visited. Robert's polished shoes clicked steadily against the sidewalk, a rhythm that had become familiar to him over the years of building his successful investment firm. Emma skipped beside him, her golden curls bouncing, beneath a pink headband, clutching a small paper bag of cookies they'd bought for her grandmother. At 52, Robert had learned that these simple moments with his daughter were more precious than any business deal he'd ever closed. The afternoon sun caught the highlights in Emma's hair, and he smiled, remembering how much she looked like her mother at that age, as they approached the intersection near the old courthouse. Robert noticed a small figure huddled against the brick wall of Murphy's restaurant. A young boy, perhaps 7 or 8 years old, sat with his knees drawn up to his chest. His dark hair was tousled, and his clothes were worn but clean. In his small hands, he held what appeared to be a piece of bread. Robert's steps slowed. Something about the child's posture, the way he sat so still and quiet, tugged at his heart. The boy's eyes held a depth that seemed too old for his young face. And Robert found himself thinking of his own childhood, of times when the world had felt uncertain and overwhelming. Emma had noticed too, her bright blue eyes fixed on the boy, and her grip on her father's hand tightened slightly. She tilted her head, studying the child with the innocent curiosity that only children possess. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice soft and wondering. "Why is that boy sitting all alone?" Robert knelt down to Emma's level, his expensive suit jacket stretching as he balanced on his heels. "I don't know, sweetheart," he said gently. "Sometimes people need to rest, or maybe they're waiting for someone." But even as he spoke the words, Robert could see that this wasn't a child simply waiting. There was something in the boy's careful stillness, in the way he held that piece of bread as if it were precious, that spoke of a different kind of waiting. Altogether, Emma studied the boy for another long moment, then looked up at her father with those clear, honest eyes that never failed to reach straight to his heart. "Daddy, can we go say hello?" He looked sad. Robert felt a familiar warmth spread through his chest. At 5 years old, Emma already possessed a compassion that never ceased to amaze him. It was a quality he'd noticed in her since she was barely walking, the way she would gently pat his face when he looked tired, or how she always shared her toys with other children at the park. "Of course we can, little one," he said, standing and adjusting his tie. "That's very thoughtful of you." They approached slowly, Robert's polished shoes now silent on the sidewalk as he took care not to startle the child. The boy looked up as they drew near, his dark eyes wary but not afraid. There was something in his gaze that reminded Robert of photographs he'd seen in old family albums, a quiet dignity that spoke of resilience. "Hello there," Robert said softly, his voice carrying the same gentle tone he used when Emma had nightmares. "I'm Robert, and this is my daughter Emma. We were just walking by and wondered if you might be hungry." The boy's eyes flickered between Robert and Emma, and for a moment, Robert saw a flash of something that made his breath catch. But before he could identify what it was, Emma stepped forward, her small hand reaching into the paper bag. "Would you like a cookie?" she asked, her voice bright and sincere. "They're really good. We got them from the bakery, and they have chocolate chips." The boy's careful composure wavered slightly, and Robert could see him struggling with whether to accept the kindness being offered. Finally, he nodded, his voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you." Emma beamed and carefully selected the largest cookie from the bag, placing it gently in the boy's outstretched hand. As their fingers touched, something extraordinary happened. Emma's eyes widened, and she took a small step back, staring at the boy with an expression of wonder and recognition. "Daddy," she said, her voice filled with an emotion Robert had never heard from her before. It was excitement, mixed with something deeper, something that made his heart skip. "Daddy, look at his eyes." Robert looked more carefully at the boy, and suddenly the world seemed to tilt. The shape of the eyes, the way the afternoon light caught them, the subtle curve of the boy's smile as he bit into the cookie. It was like looking into a mirror that reflected not his own face, but a face he'd known and loved long ago. Next words came out in a rush, filled with the pure, unfiltered truth that only children can speak. "Daddy, that's my brother." Asterisk the words hit Robert like a physical blow. He felt his knees buckle, and he had to reach out to steady himself against the brick wall of the restaurant. The paper bag fell from his suddenly nerveless fingers. Cookies, scattering across the sidewalk, asterisk 23 years. 23 years since he'd been a young man, barely out of college, working his first job and trying to figure out what life meant. 23 years since he'd fallen in love with Maria, a gentlewoman with kind eyes who'd worked at the coffee shop near his apartment. 23 years since she'd told him she was carrying his child, and he'd panicked, thinking he wasn't ready. Wasn't mature enough. Wasn't brave enough to be a father. Asterisk 23 years since. He'd made the biggest mistake of his life and walked away. Asterisk the boy, his son, looked up at him with concern as Robert struggled to breathe. "Mister, are you okay?" Asterisk Robert's vision, blurred as tears he'd held back for more than 2 decades, finally found their way to the surface. All those years of success, of building a business, of finally becoming the man he'd thought he needed to be. And here was his son, sitting on a sidewalk, holding a piece of bread like it was treasure. Asterisk, "I'm sorry," Robert whispered, the words torn from somewhere deep in his chest. "I'm so sorry." Asterisk Emma, with the intuitive understanding that children sometimes possess, moved closer to the boy. "What's your name?" she asked softly. Asterisk Daniel, the boy replied, his eyes still fixed on Robert with a mixture of confusion and something that might have been hope. Asterisk Daniel, Robert repeated, the name feeling both foreign and familiar on his tongue. He'd wondered, over the years, what Maria had named their child. He'd imagined conversations, bedtime stories, birthday parties, all the moments he'd missed because he'd been too scared to stay. Asterisk slowly, carefully, Robert lowered himself to sit on the sidewalk beside Daniel. His expensive suit would be ruined, but he didn't care. Nothing mattered except this moment, this chance he'd never dared to hope for. Asterisk Daniel, he said again, his voice steadier now. "I need to tell you something I should have told you a long time ago." Asterisk, the boy waited, patient in the way that children who've learned to be careful often are. Asterisk, "I'm your father," Robert said simply, "and I've been looking for you for a very long time." Asterisk, it wasn't entirely true. He'd been too much of a coward to actively search, but it was true in his heart. Every day for 23 years, he'd wondered. Every time he'd seen a child on the street, he'd looked twice. Every birthday that passed, he'd calculated how old his son would be. Asterisk Daniel's eyes widened, and for a moment, Robert was afraid the boy might run. Instead, Daniel asked, "Where have you been?" Asterisk the question was asked without accusation, just simple curiosity, and somehow that made it hurt even more. Asterisk, "I was scared," Robert admitted, the words feeling strange but liberating. "I was young and scared, and I made a terrible mistake. But I never stopped thinking about you, not once." Asterisk Emma, who had been listening with the serious attention she usually reserved for bedtime stories, suddenly clapped her hands together. "This means I have a big brother," she announced, her joy pure and infectious. Asterisk Daniel looked at her, then at Robert, and slowly a smile began to spread across his face. It was hesitant at first, then broader, until it transformed his entire expression. "Asterisk, a little sister," he said wonderingly. "I always wanted a little sister." Asterisk Robert felt his heart break and heal at the same time. Here was his son, who had every right to be angry, to be hurt, to reject him completely, and instead he was smiling at the possibility of family. Asterisk, "Where's your mother?" Robert asked gently. "Where's Maria?" Asterisk Daniel's smile faltered slightly. "She's at the hospital. She's been sick for a while, and today was really bad. I was supposed to wait at Mrs. Patterson's house, but she had to go to work, and I was scared to be alone, so I came here to wait." Asterisk, the words hit Robert like another wave of regret. While he'd been building his fortune, his son, and the woman he'd once loved had been struggling. While he'd been worried about stock prices and business deals, his child had been sitting alone on sidewalks, afraid and hungry. Asterisk, "We're going to the hospital right now," Robert said, standing and dusting off his suit. "And then we're going to figure out how to make everything better." Asterisk, as they walked toward Robert's car, Emma slipped her small hand into Daniel's larger one. "I have so many toys," she told him earnestly, "and books and games. We can share everything." Daniel squeezed her hand gently. "I'd like that," he said. "I'd like that very much." Robert watched his children walking ahead of him, their hands linked, their voices mixing in the crisp autumn air. He thought about the turns life takes, the chances we're given to make things right, and the way children can forgive with a completeness that adults often can't manage. He'd spent 23 years building a successful business, but he realized, now that he'd been building it for the wrong reasons, he'd been trying to become worthy of love, when love had been waiting for him all along. As they reached the car, Robert made a silent promise to himself and to his children. He would spend the rest of his life making up for lost time, being the father he should have been from the beginning, and maybe, if he was very lucky, he might even find a way to earn forgiveness from Maria. 2. The autumn sun was setting as they drove toward the hospital, painting the sky in shades of gold and amber. In the rearview mirror, Robert could see Emma and Daniel talking quietly, their faces lit with the wonder of new connection. Sometimes, he thought, the most important journeys begin with a single act of kindness. A cookie offered to a stranger, a child's innocent observation, a father's long overdue courage to face his mistakes. Sometimes, the greatest gifts come disguised as the most ordinary moments, waiting on sidewalks for us to finally see them clearly, and sometimes it takes the pure heart of a child to show us what we've been missing all along.